The chandeliers inside the Plaza Hotel glittered like 1,000 tiny suns. Reporters filled the marble hall, cameras flashing, champagne glasses raised. Cole Harrington, the Manhattan real estate tycoon everyone admired, was standing at the podium, his black tuxedo crisp, his smile rehearsed to perfection. "Tonight," he said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere, "I dedicate this event to my late wife, Grace Whitmore. She gave me love and 3 beautiful children before she left this world." The audience sighed. Women dabbed their eyes. On the giant screen behind him, a picture appeared. Grace in a soft white dress, her hands over a pregnant belly, smiling in the sunlight. For a second, Cole's jaw clenched. Then the next image flashed. Him and Sloane Mercer, his new fiancée, in matching black formal wear, standing on the balcony of his Park Avenue penthouse. Grace watched it all from the back of the ballroom. She stood in the shadows near the service door, wearing a plain black coat, her hair shorter now, her body thinner. The room that once belonged to her world now felt like a movie she had died in. But she hadn't died. She had been left to die. 9 months earlier, Grace had gone into labor during the storm of the decade. The power failed at Lenox Hill Hospital. They told her husband she was gone after massive blood loss. But when she woke up days later, she was in a different facility, nameless, recorded as Jane Doe. Someone had paid to keep her off every registry. Grace remembered none of it clearly, only flashes. A woman's perfume Dior, heavy and sharp, lingering over her hospital bed. A man's watch glinting under the emergency light. A voice whispering, "It's better if she doesn't wake up." Now, as Cole raised a toast to love, loss, and new beginnings, Grace's fingers tightened around the small velvet box she had carried for months. Inside lay her wedding ring, the one he'd told the world had been buried with her. On stage, Sloane leaned close to Cole, her laughter sweet and poisonous. Grace's eyes filled with tears that burned like fire. She had come tonight not to beg, not to weep, but to witness. Because tomorrow, the first DNA report would arrive. And with it, the proof that she was alive, and that one of those 3 children carried a mark no one else could forge. And when that truth reached the stage, every secret Cole built would explode under the same lights he used to mourn her. Before Grace Whitmore became the ghost of a millionaire's wife, she was light, quiet, steady light. She was 32, a former art teacher who believed in little things. Morning coffee from the same cafe on Fifth Avenue, paperback novels from the corner Barnes & Noble, sketches of Central Park children playing under the autumn leaves. She believed in kindness, and she believed in Cole. When she met him 5 years earlier, Cole Harrington was not yet the man who'd trade hearts for headlines. He was charming, ambitious, and sweetly awkward, always tapping his Mont Blanc pen when nervous. He told her she grounded him. She told him he made her feel seen. They married at the River Cafe, beneath the Brooklyn Bridge, the city lights dancing like promises across the water. He placed a Tiffany ring on her finger and whispered, "You'll never stand alone." But promises rot when fame and money touch them. As Cole's company exploded into the luxury market, Manhattan towers, Beverly Hills villas, his eyes shifted from love to legacy. Grace didn't notice at first. She stayed home, decorating the nursery, carrying the miracle of 3 lives inside her fragile frame. Her pregnancy was complicated and doctors warned her to rest. Cole was rarely there. Instead, there was Sloane Mercer. She began as a public relations consultant, a woman with glossy hair and the kind of perfume that announced power before she spoke. She flattered Cole's ego, telling him the world needed to see him as more than a husband, more than a man chained to a family. Grace found their first message by accident, a text meant for Cole's assistant. "She's sweet but soft. He needs someone who can build an empire, not paint one." That night, Grace waited until he came home, asked softly, "Are you happy?" Cole smiled, kissed her forehead, and lied, "You're all I'll ever need." The next morning, he left for Los Angeles with Sloane. That was the last week Grace felt safe. During her final month of pregnancy, the walls of the Park Avenue penthouse grew colder. She would sit in the nursery, painting tiny birds on the wall, whispering names to her unborn children, Eli, Noah, and Ava. When contractions started early, she called Cole. He didn't answer. Sloane did. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "He's in a meeting, Grace. Don't worry, I'll send help." But what came that night wasn't help. It was erasure. When the storm hit and the ambulance rushed her through flooded streets, Grace clutched her belly and prayed. She remembered the lights flickering in the hospital, the sound of rain against glass, a faint male voice saying, "Tell him she didn't make it." And then darkness. Now 9 months later, as she looked at her reflection in the hotel's service mirror, short hair, pale skin, eyes hollow but burning, Grace realized something terrible and pure. Cole hadn't just moved on because he thought she was gone. He had wanted her gone. Every tender word, every tear he shed in public was part of the act Sloane had scripted. And Grace? She had been written out of her own life, but not for long. Because beneath the plain black coat she wore tonight, there was the scar from the surgery that proved she had given life, and a hidden envelope that could destroy every lie they'd built. And by the time the next sunrise touched Manhattan, Grace Whitmore would no longer be the woman he buried, but the storm he could never escape. The rain that night didn't just fall, it attacked the city. Manhattan streets flooded, sirens screamed, and lightning cut across the skyline like a warning from heaven. Inside the ambulance, Grace clutched her swollen belly, gasping as pain tore through her. "Please, my babies," she whispered, her voice cracking. The medic tried to reassure her, but his hands trembled as the vehicle bounced over a flooded curb. At Lenox Hill Hospital, the generator flickered on and off. The maternity ward was chaos, alarms blaring, nurses running through dim halls. Grace was rushed into surgery, her face pale under the sterile light. Somewhere beyond those swinging doors, Cole Harrington stood in a hallway, soaked and furious. He hadn't wanted to be there. Sloane had insisted. She wore a trench coat that smelled like Dior Sauvage and a face that never cracked. "You don't have to watch this," she murmured. "You've done enough." Cole hesitated, glancing toward the operating room window. "She's still my wife," he muttered. "For now," Sloane replied, her lips curving. "But when this is over, you'll finally be free." A thunderclap swallowed his silence. Inside, Grace fought to breathe as doctors shouted for more blood. Her last image before blacking out was a nurse's terrified eyes. Hours later, when Cole returned, the doctor told him the words that would change everything. "We're sorry. We lost her." He didn't cry. Not at first. Then Sloane stepped forward, tears shimmering perfectly in her lashes. She took his hand, guided him to sit. "Let me handle everything," she whispered. "You need to rest." By dawn, the paperwork was filed. Cause of death, postpartum hemorrhage, status deceased. Cole signed without reading the fine print, because Sloane had already read it for him. But Grace wasn't dead. Down in the basement wing, a nurse named Maya Brooks was checking patients when she saw the wrong tag on the wrong bed. The woman labeled Jane Doe, critical condition, looked too clean, too freshly operated on. Maya flipped through the chart. No name, but the surgical time matched Grace Whitmore's emergency C-section. "Who authorized this transfer?" she asked. "Administrative order," the intern said, avoiding her eyes. "From the PR desk, I think. Special case." Maya frowned. "Since when does PR handle medical transfers?" But the ambulance had already arrived. 2 men in plain uniforms wheeled the unconscious woman away, her wristband half torn. As they pushed her into the elevator, Maya caught a glimpse of a gold wedding ring still on the woman's finger. That ring would never reach the morgue. The next morning, headlines broke. Grace Whitmore, wife of real estate mogul Cole Harrington, dies after giving birth to triplets. Photos of Cole's sorrow filled the news cycle. Sloane stood behind him at the press conference, the perfect widow's shadow for a man who wasn't a widower. Meanwhile, in a private rehab facility in Queens, the Jane Doe was breathing again. Machines beeped softly beside her bed. Her pulse steadied. But her memory, her name, was gone. When Maya later tried to check the hospital records, everything had vanished. Digital logs wiped, transfer papers missing. Someone had buried Grace Whitmore without digging a grave. Back at the penthouse, Sloane poured Cole a drink, her voice silk over steel. "You did the right thing," she said. "The past is buried. Now it's time to live." Cole stared at the city lights outside, his reflection ghosting in the glass. For a moment, he swore he saw Grace's face in that reflection. Eyes open, unbroken. And somewhere across the river, the woman he'd signed away was starting to breathe her way back to life. Grace woke to a world that didn't recognize her. The ceiling above her was white, humming softly with fluorescent light. Her throat burned, her arms felt heavy, and a machine beside her beeped in slow, steady rhythm. She blinked, tried to speak, but no sound came. A nurse entered, a kind face, tired eyes. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said. "Don't try to talk yet. You've been through a lot." Grace tried to ask where she was, but only air escaped her lips. The nurse smiled faintly. "You're safe. You're at Queen's Rehabilitation Center. You were brought in during the storm. No ID, no family listed. We've been calling you Jane." Jane. The name felt foreign, like a costume that didn't fit. Grace reached for her stomach. The scar was there, raw and stitched. Something was missing, something she couldn't name. The nurse hesitated, then whispered gently, "You gave birth, honey? The babies didn't make it." The world tilted. Grace turned her head, tears rolling into her hairline. She didn't remember their faces. She didn't remember anything. For weeks she lived like a shadow. Physical therapy in the morning, blank walls by night. Her mind was fog, but sometimes flashes cut through, lightning over the city, a man's hand holding hers, a ring that gleamed under sterile light. And a voice, a woman's cool, smooth, saying, "It's better if she doesn't wake up." Then one evening, as she sat by the window watching an ambulance scream past, a nurse mentioned the news. "Terrible story," she said. "That rich guy's wife, the one who died giving birth to triplets, her name was Grace something. Such a tragedy." The fork fell from Grace's hand. Her pulse quickened, her skin prickled. Grace. The name struck something deep inside her, like a locked door shifting on its hinges. She stumbled to her room, searched her bedside drawer, found her chart. The name Jane Doe stared back, but the hospital ID number had been scratched out and replaced by another code. Someone had changed it. Over the next few days, she started asking questions. The staff grew uneasy. "You should rest," they said. "Focus on healing." But one night, she overheard two orderlies talking outside her door. "BIP transfer," one muttered. "Whole file wiped. PR money, man. They don't want her found." Grace didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark, clutching her pillow, the word Grace echoing in her skull until it felt like truth. The next morning, she stole a glance at a nurse's ID tag, Maya Brooks, and whispered hoarsely, "Please. Help me." Maya paused. There was something about this woman's eyes, fearful yet fierce, that refused to be ignored. She checked the old archives, cross-referenced the surgery times. What she found chilled her blood. 2 patients operated on the same night, same timestamp, one missing from the system entirely. She looked up at Grace. "I think someone erased you." Grace's lips trembled. "Why?" Maya didn't answer. She just folded the paper back into her pocket and said quietly, "Because maybe someone needed you dead." That night, when the rain returned to New York, Grace lay awake, staring at the city lights flickering through her window. She didn't remember her husband's name yet. She didn't remember her home. But somewhere deep inside, a mother's instinct whispered louder than fear. She hadn't lost her babies. Someone had stolen them. And whoever did it was still out there, living her life. On the 42nd floor of his Park Avenue penthouse, Cole Harrington stood in front of the glass wall that looked over Manhattan. The city glittered below him. Tiny lights, beautiful, obedient. Everything he owned was perfect. Everything except the part of him that still remembered her. Grace. Her name had become a ghost in his head, one he only spoke when the cameras were off. To the world, he was the grieving husband turned devoted father. The newspapers called him the Phoenix of Wall Street. His face smiled from Forbes covers, his story trending on every luxury blog, from tragedy to triumph. But at night, when Sloane slipped into his bed wearing his shirt and her diamond earrings, he couldn't close his eyes without seeing the hospital's white light flicker. He told himself he'd done what he had to do. He told himself Grace's death was fate. But somewhere inside he knew. It wasn't fate. It was convenience. Sloane made sure of that. She had cleaned up every trace of the chaos that night. The fake certificate, the transfer paperwork, the anonymous payments to the hospital staff, all signed off through her PR firm. She told Cole the world loved redemption stories, not messy truths. "You were a husband," she said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. "Now you're a symbol. Don't ruin it by chasing ghosts." Cole stared at the amber liquid. "And if the ghost is real?" Sloane's red lips curved into a smile. "Then we bury her twice." Downstairs, the babies were sleeping. 3 perfect lives wrapped in designer blankets, nannies watching from the nursery equipped with white noise machines and Tiffany lamps. To the public, they were miracles. To Sloane, they were assets, proof of a legacy she could build her empire upon. She had already arranged the press shoot for next week. Cole and fiancé Sloane introduced Triplets to the world. A polished headline, a new image, a new lie. Cole played along because the world expected him to. But guilt was a quiet cancer. It spread every time he saw one of the babies smile. He'd see Grace's eyes in them, and it would claw at him until dawn. Once, he almost confessed. He told Sloane, "Sometimes I dream she's still out there." Sloane laughed softly, her voice like velvet and venom. If she were a darling, she'd have come back by now. He believed her, or tried to. Until the letter arrived. It was delivered in a plain envelope. No return address, no stamp. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, a woman sitting by a hospital window, her profile faint but familiar. Written across the bottom in shaky handwriting were 3 words, "She is alive." Cole's blood turned to ice. He read it again, then again, his hands shaking. He thought of Sloane, what she'd done, what they'd buried together. If Grace was alive, everything they'd built would crumble. The inheritance, the company, the public sympathy. Sloane found him standing there, the photo trembling in his grip. "Who sent that?" she asked too calmly. "I don't know," he said, "but if it's real." She tore the picture from his hand, ripped it in half, and dropped it into the crystal ashtray. "Then make sure it's not." Cole watched the flames devour Grace's face. He wanted to feel relief, but all he felt was nausea. Because deep down, he knew one thing Sloane didn't. The handwriting on that photo, those 3 uneven words, belonged to Maya Brooks, the nurse who had been there the night Grace died. And if Maya knew Grace was alive, it meant the past was already clawing its way back to him. The letter had done its job. By the time Cole burned the photograph, the quiet war between truth and lies had already begun, and Maya Brooks was the one who started it. Maya had worked in the NICU at Lenox Hill for 8 years. She'd seen miracles, heartbreaks, and parents who would give up everything for a single heartbeat. But the night Grace Whitmore died, something had never sat right. The patient files had been switched mid-surgery. The timestamps didn't match. The Jane Doe in bed 4 had the same blood type, same emergency code, and the same surgical scar as Grace Whitmore. Yet, somehow, Grace's official death certificate was printed 2 hours before the baby monitors even stabilized. Maya had questioned it once. A week after the storm, she asked her supervisor about the missing records. The next day, she was reassigned to a different wing. Budget rotation, they said, but she knew better. And now, 9 months later, she'd found Grace. Alive, frail, but breathing. Maya didn't tell anyone. Instead, she started documenting everything. Copies of hospital records, transfer orders, billing codes, even the digital fingerprints from Sloane's PR firm that had funded the mysterious postnatal care payments. She'd slipped the photo into an envelope and sent it to Cole, hoping guilt would force him to act. But when no answer came, she knew she'd underestimated the corruption sitting in that penthouse. At Queen's Rehabilitation, Maya checked on Grace daily. The woman was recovering faster, her voice growing stronger. The more she healed, the more her memories bled through. "I keep seeing faces," Grace whispered one morning, staring out the window. A man in a black suit, a woman with red lips. She smelled like perfume. Dior, I think. Maya's pulse quickened. "Do you remember their names?" Grace hesitated. "Cole. My husband, his name was Cole." That was the moment Maya decided to tell her. "Grace," she said softly, pulling out her phone. She typed the name Cole Harrington into Google and turned the screen toward her. The image loaded. Cole smiling at a press conference, holding 3 babies in matching white outfits, and beside him Sloane Mercer, radiant in designer black. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Those are my babies." Maya nodded slowly. "They're alive, and the world thinks you're dead." Grace stared at the photo until her vision blurred. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew I was alive." Maya placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you need to take back your name." Over the next weeks, they planned carefully. Maya contacted Daniel Cho, a corporate attorney who'd once worked under Cole's father. He owed Maya a favor. She'd saved his niece in the NICU years ago. When he saw the documents, he went pale. "If this leaks, it'll destroy them," he said. "But we need proof." Grace looked at him, her voice steadier than it had been since she woke. "I don't want revenge. I want the truth." Daniel smiled grimly. "In this city, Grace, the truth is revenge." That night, Maya helped her cut her hair short and handed her a plain coat. "You'll need to be invisible for now," she said. "If Sloane finds out you're breathing, she'll finish what she started." Grace slipped the coat on, feeling the weight of her new identity. She wasn't just a forgotten patient anymore. She was a mother, a wife, and a ghost about to walk back into the world that buried her. And when she did, Maya swore she'd be right behind her. Because this time, the nurse wasn't following orders. She was following justice. The train from Queens rattled across the bridge as dawn broke over Manhattan. Grace sat by the window, clutching a folder tight against her chest. Inside were copies of medical records, blood test forms, and the hospital's billing slips that Maya had risked her job to steal. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from purpose. For the first time in nearly a year, Grace was heading home. When the skyline appeared, the Empire State Building cutting through fog like a memory, her throat tightened. Somewhere in those glass towers lived the man who had buried her and the woman who had stolen her life. She wore no makeup, just a gray coat and a wool hat that shadowed her face. She looked ordinary, invisible, which was exactly how she needed to be. Maya had warned her not to confront them yet. "Let Daniel build the case first," she'd said. "If they know you're alive, they'll try to silence you." But Grace couldn't wait. Every hour apart from her children felt like another betrayal. She needed to see them, even from afar. She stepped off the train and walked the streets she once called home. Park Avenue gleaming with wealth, Fifth Avenue windows glittering with diamonds she used to pass on her way to teach art. Everything looked the same, but she was different. At a cafe near Madison Square, she sat in the corner with a cup of coffee she could barely afford. On the magazine rack by the counter, a glossy cover caught her eye. Cole and Sloane. The headline read, "New York's power couple to host charity gala for orphaned children." Her stomach turned. Orphaned children. That was how they described her babies. Children whose mother had died tragically. Grace walked to the counter, ripped the magazine from the rack, and left a $5 bill she couldn't spare. She tucked the issue into her bag and whispered, "Not orphaned, stolen." That afternoon, Daniel met her in a small office on the Lower East Side. "We can't go public yet," he said, scanning the files Maya had gathered. "We need a DNA confirmation linking you directly to one of the kids. Without that, they'll bury this story faster than the last one." Grace's jaw set. "Then I'll find one of them myself." Daniel sighed. "Grace, listen to me. Cole has private security. You can't just walk up to that penthouse." But Grace already knew she would. That night, as Manhattan glittered under the evening lights, she stood across the street from her old home, the Park Avenue penthouse she once filled with laughter and baby plans. Through the giant windows she could see movement. Sloane in a silk robe holding a baby, while Cole poured himself a drink. The sight knocked the air out of her. Her babies, alive, beautiful, moving, breathing. Her tears blurred the lights until they looked like stars underwater. She pressed her hand against her belly where the scar still burned. "They're mine," she whispered. Across the street, Cole looked up suddenly, as if sensing something. Their eyes didn't meet. He only saw his reflection in the glass. But Grace felt the pulse of it, a connection that refused to die. She turned away before she could break. She had no money, no ID, no name anyone recognized. But she had truth, and that was sharper than any weapon. As she disappeared into the night, the first snow began to fall over Manhattan, and somewhere high above, in the penthouse she once called home, the man who thought he'd buried her was about to start dreaming of the dead. Grace returned to the city like a ghost who refused to rest. Days blurred into nights. She drifted between cheap motels and crowded cafes, keeping her head low, her eyes sharp. Her old life had been filled with galleries and brunches on Fifth Avenue. Now she lived on black coffee and determination. Every morning she walked past her old penthouse just to catch a glimpse of her children through the windows. The nannies changed shifts at 9. That was when she saw them most. 3 tiny figures crawling on a plush rug, chasing the light that spilled through the glass. One of them, the smallest, had her eyes. Maya warned her to stop, but Grace couldn't. "They need to know I'm real," she whispered one night over the phone. "You'll get caught," Maya hissed. "If Sloane even suspects you're alive, she'll finish what she started." But Grace wasn't afraid anymore. She'd already lost everything once. Daniel, the lawyer, moved quietly behind the scenes. He reached out to a contact in the Harrington Family Trust, someone willing to confirm a key fact. All trust disbursements required maternal confirmation. In other words, Cole couldn't fully access the inheritance for the children without proving who their mother was. It was the first crack in his empire. Meanwhile, Cole's life looked perfect to the outside world. Magazine covers, TV interviews, charity events. But at night, the lies began to rot from the inside. He was drinking more. Sloane noticed. "You're slipping," she said, setting her glass of red wine on the marble counter. Cole ignored her, scrolling through an email that had arrived from an anonymous sender. Attached was a blurry photo. Grace, standing across the street from the penthouse. The timestamp was 2 days old. "She's dead," he muttered to himself. Sloane leaned over his shoulder, her face tightening. "If she isn't," she said, "then you'd better pray no one else knows." Grace didn't know about the photo, but she felt their panic in the air. The penthouse security doubled. The curtains stayed closed. The nannies no longer took the children to the park. They were hiding, but from what? They didn't even know. To gather evidence, Daniel arranged a discreet meeting with Dr. Kellen, the attending surgeon from the night of Grace's death. The man looked nervous, eyes darting around the coffee shop. "I was paid to keep quiet," he confessed. "They said it was a privacy matter. The woman survived the surgery, but the file was sealed. They told me she was transferred to Queens." Grace's heart raced. "So you knew?" "I didn't know who was behind it," he said. "But I know now." He slid a small flash drive across the table. "Security footage from that night. I made a copy before the system was wiped." On the screen, under the cold hospital lights, a woman in heels walked beside a gurney carrying an unconscious Grace. The woman's face turned toward the camera for just one frame, enough to show red lipstick and a cold smile. Sloane Mercer. Grace's hands shook as she closed the laptop. Daniel met her eyes. "This is proof. We take this to the police." Grace nodded slowly, but something inside her burned hotter than justice. "No," she said. "We take it to him. He needs to see what he buried." That night she stood once more beneath her old window. Snow drifted down, the city glowing gold and cruel. By the time the sun rose, Cole Harrington would know that the woman he killed in silence was standing outside, ready to speak. Cole Harrington had forgotten what silence sounded like. The Park Avenue penthouse was full of noise. Nannies whispering, phones ringing, the faint hum of luxury. But inside his head, there was only static. He couldn't stop thinking about the photo. Grace standing across the street, alive. He told himself it wasn't real, that it was just a trick of grief, a look-alike, a cruel coincidence. But he couldn't stop replaying the image, the way her posture leaned slightly to the left, just like it used to when she held her sketchbooks. That morning he told Sloane, "I need air." "Air?" she echoed, her tone sharp. "You mean guilt." He left anyway, slipping past security and taking the service elevator down to the garage. The driver hesitated when Cole gave an address not on his usual schedule. "Central Park," he said flatly. The car rolled through streets glistening with fresh snow. Outside, families pulled sleds, couples walked hand in hand, the world moved like nothing was broken. But to Cole, everything was cracked. He stepped out near the fountain where he and Grace once took their engagement photos. He remembered her laughing, the sound brighter than the city itself. Now only echoes remained. Then, from the corner of his eye, movement. A woman, wrapped in a gray coat, standing near the trees. He turned, his heart pounding, and for a second he saw her face. Pale, sharp, familiar. Grace. Their eyes met. Time fractured. Cole froze, unable to speak. Grace's lips parted, trembling, but before either could move, a taxi horn blared, cutting through the moment. When he blinked again, she was gone, swallowed by the crowd. He stumbled backward, breath shallow. "No," he whispered, "it can't be." That night, he came home shaken. Sloane was waiting, wine in hand, her expression ice. "You saw her, didn't you?" He didn't answer. "Say it," she pressed, stepping closer. "You saw your dead wife." Cole's jaw clenched. "I saw someone who looked like her." Sloane's smile was thin, brittle. "Then you'd better hope that's all it was, because if she's alive, everything we've built burns to ash." She threw a file on the table. The foundation's financials. Every deal, every signature, every charity check, your widower status made it work. If she comes back, you lose it all. He looked down at the papers. the empire built on lies. For the first time, the weight of it pressed on him like a coffin lid. "Maybe it's what I deserve," he muttered. Sloane's eyes flashed. "Don't you dare grow a conscience now." Across town, Grace sat in a dim motel room, the city's lights flickering through dirty curtains. She still felt the moment their eyes met, how his expression had shifted from arrogance to disbelief, from disbelief to something rawer. Fear. Maya called her that night. "Did you do it?" "I didn't mean to," Grace said softly. "You saw me." "Then we move faster," Maya replied. "Daniel says the DNA order can be filed by the end of the week. Once that test hits, they can't hide anymore." Grace hung up and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. "He looked at me like he'd seen a ghost," she whispered. For years, Cole had built an empire of grief, selling the story of a dead wife and his noble recovery. Tomorrow that illusion would begin to rot. And somewhere deep inside his polished penthouse, the sound of a baby crying broke the night silence, soft, haunting, and real. Cole turned toward the nursery, heart pounding, unsure why the sound suddenly terrified him. Because for the first time he wasn't sure if it was the baby crying or the ghosts coming home. The invitation shimmered in gold foil, the Harrington Foundation Gala, a night of hope. Grace held the card between her fingers, reading the words over and over. Hope. That was the word Cole had stolen from her. And tomorrow night, she was going to take it back. Daniel had spent the week coordinating the trap. The DNA order had been approved. Samples were already being collected from the hospital archives. Umbilical records, blood tests, birth certificates. Once the results hit, he said, the truth won't just leak, it'll detonate. Maya smirked. Perfect timing. They're hosting that ridiculous gala tomorrow. Whole city watching. Let the truth walk through the front door. Grace's stomach twisted. They'll be expecting a headline. Let's give them one. The next night, the Plaza Hotel gleamed brighter than ever. Paparazzi lined the entrance as limousines rolled up, dropping off Manhattan's finest. Politicians, socialites, investors, all dressed in black and gold. Inside, chandeliers blazed, violins played, and Cole Harrington stood center stage. Every inch the charming widower turned hero. His tuxedo was flawless, his grief rehearsed. Sloane, by his side in a red silk gown, looked like victory dressed as sin. Cole raised his glass. "To love that endures beyond loss," he said, "and to the future we build in its name." Applause thundered, cameras flashed. But at the edge of the ballroom, behind the service doors, Grace stood watching. Her hair was pinned up, her black dress simple but elegant. She looked like a guest, not a ghost. Maya was in her earpiece, whispering directions. "You're clear. Daniel's ready in the control room. When I say go, walk toward the stage." Grace's pulse thudded in her ears. Across the room, Cole laughed, the perfect host. But every sound, the clinking glasses, the murmur of the crowd, blurred into one dull roar as Grace took her first step forward. She moved through the crowd slowly, eyes fixed on the man who had buried her. Some guests turned, confused, then curious. The resemblance was uncanny, they thought. Sloane froze first. The smile vanished from her face. Her wine glass tilted, spilling red onto the marble floor like blood. "Cole," she whispered, "don't look." But he did. And when his eyes found hers, the world stopped breathing. Grace, alive, standing 20 feet away in the same ballroom where he had mourned her. The microphone slipped from his hand. It clattered against the stage, echoing like thunder. Gasps rippled through the room. Sloane's voice cracked. "Security!" Grace didn't flinch. "No need," she said calmly, her voice carrying across the hall. "I'm right where I belong." Daniel stepped out from the side hall with 2 officers and a court envelope. "Cole Harrington, you've been served," he announced. "Paternity and fraud investigation, effective immediately." The ballroom erupted. Cameras flashed, guests whispered, reporters surged forward. Cole stumbled down the steps, face pale. "Grace," he breathed. How is this possible?" She looked at him with quiet fury. "You told them I was dead. You signed the papers. You built your empire on my grave." Sloane lunged forward. "She's lying. She's a lunatic." Grace reached into her clutch and pulled out a USB drive. "This holds the footage from Lenox Hill Hospital. You walked beside the gurney that carried me out, Sloane. You knew I lived." For the first time, Sloane's mask cracked. Reporters shouted questions. Police lights flashed outside. Grace took a slow breath, tears gathering but never falling. "You wanted a story, Cole? Here's the real one. She turned toward the crowd. The dead don't stay buried, not when truth has a heartbeat. And as the ballroom descended into chaos, the woman he'd killed in silence finally came back to life, under the same lights that had once mourned her. For a few eternal seconds, no one in the ballroom moved. The lights, the cameras, the glittering skyline of Manhattan reflected across a sea of stunned faces. Cole Harrington, man of the year, husband of tragedy, stood center stage, staring at the living proof of his betrayal. Grace Whitmore, alive, breathing, unbroken. Sloan Mercer's voice sliced through the silence first. "This is a stunt," she shouted, grabbing the microphone. "She's an imposter, someone paid to humiliate us." But her hands were trembling. Grace took one calm step forward. "You buried me once, Sloan. Don't try again." The reporters erupted, questions flying, flashes exploding like gunfire. Daniel Cho held up the court order, his voice rising over the chaos. "This isn't a stunt. The court has ordered a full DNA verification between Mrs. Whitmore and the Harrington children, effective immediately." Cole turned toward him, voice cracking. "Daniel, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand," Daniel said coldly. "You built an empire on fraud." Sloan tried to leave, but two officers blocked her path. One handed her a warrant. "Ma'am, you'll need to stay for questioning regarding falsified hospital documents." Cole's world tilted. He could hear people whispering, investors, journalists, board members, all the powerful names that had once admired him, now watching his downfall unfold in real time. Grace stood inches away, her voice low but steady. "You let them tell me my babies were dead, Cole. You stood by while she erased me." His throat tightened. "I thought—" "No," she interrupted. "You chose." The music had stopped, but the sound of rain outside filled the silence. A storm returning, just like her. Grace turned to the crowd. "For a year they told the world I was gone, but the truth never dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to dig it up." She handed the USB drive to Daniel, who passed it to the police. The projection screen flickered, and suddenly the ballroom filled with hospital footage. The basement hallway of Lenox Hill, a gurney, a woman in heels beside it. The frame paused just as Sloane's face turned toward the camera. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sloane lunged for Cole. "You promised this would never come out." Cole backed away, pale, eyes wide. "You told me she died." Sloane's mask broke. "You wanted her gone as much as I did." The room exploded with noise, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, police radios crackling. Sloane tried to run, but the officers caught her by the arm. Grace didn't move. She simply watched as the woman who had taken everything from her was led away in handcuffs, the same red gown now wrinkled and smeared with wine and panic. Cole dropped to his knees on the stage. "Grace, please. I made a mistake. I was weak." She looked down at him, tears burning her eyes. "Weak men destroy strong women and call it fate." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "Don't touch me. The children will know who I am, but you—" Her voice caught. "You'll have to live knowing you buried the only person who ever truly loved you." The police escorted Cole off stage for questioning. The cameras followed every step, the audience whispering, the empire of glamour turning into ashes before their eyes. Grace turned toward Daniel and Maya, who waited near the exit. Maya smiled through tears. "You did it," she whispered. Grace exhaled, trembling. "No," she said softly. "Truth did." As she walked out of the ballroom, reporters called her name. Flashbulbs flared like lightning, but she didn't look back. Because for the first time in a year, Grace Whitmore wasn't a ghost anymore. She was the storm that buried the dead. By morning, New York was already awake with scandal. Every news channel replayed the footage from the plaza. Grace Whitmore, the woman declared dead, standing alive on stage while her husband and his mistress fell apart under the spotlight. The headlines were merciless. The billionaire's lie. The widow who wasn't. The resurrection of Grace Whitmore. In every cafe, every office, every corner of Manhattan, her name was on everyone's lips. Grace watched it unfold from a small hotel room downtown, her phone buzzing non-stop. Maya had turned it off hours ago. "You can't read those comments," she said firmly. "Half of them want to crown you, the other half want to crucify you." Grace stared out the window. "I didn't come back for fame, Maya. I came back for my children." Daniel arrived, his tie loose, his eyes red from sleeplessness. "It's working," he said. The court froze Cole's accounts pending the fraud investigation. The DNA samples will be processed within 48 hours. Once they match, you'll be recognized legally as the mother. Grace nodded, silent. But the victory didn't taste sweet. She kept thinking of the 3 babies sleeping in that penthouse, her babies, who had no idea their mother was alive. I want to see them, she whispered. Daniel hesitated. You can't? Not yet. The security detail around them has tripled since last night. Grace clenched her jaw. He doesn't deserve to be near them. He won't be, Daniel said. Once the test results come through, you'll have full custody, but you have to stay hidden until then. Across the city, Cole Harrington's empire crumbled like sand. The board suspended him within hours. Investors pulled out, sponsors vanished. His phone rang endlessly, but no one wanted to help. Sloane, meanwhile, sat in a holding cell, stripped of her diamonds and her power. Her attorney tried to negotiate bail, but the hospital footage had gone viral. Every detail, the falsified death certificate, the PR payments, the secret transfers, was now public record. Cole visited her once. She looked up from the metal table, her red lipstick gone, her eyes hollow. You think they'll forgive you because you were weak? She hissed. They'll crucify you too. He said nothing. He couldn't. When he returned home, the penthouse felt like a mausoleum. The mirrors reflected a man he didn't recognize. The nannies avoided his eyes. In the nursery, the babies slept peacefully under soft white lights. He reached for one crib, but his hand froze. They had Grace's eyes. He fell to his knees beside them, sobbing silently into his palms. Everything he had built, money, fame, luxury, was worthless. The woman he had destroyed was now the only one who could save what little humanity he had left. Back downtown, Grace sat at the edge of her bed, a file of legal documents open in her lap. She had reclaimed her name, her dignity, her truth. But she still didn't have her children. Maya placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. One more day, she said softly. Then you'll be their mother again. Grace nodded, her eyes glistening. I don't want revenge anymore, she said. I just want peace. Peace will come, Maya replied. But justice comes first. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow. Grace looked toward the skyline where the penthouse lights flickered faintly in the distance. And somewhere in that tower of glass, the man who had buried her was finally digging his own grave. With guilt, not gold. The city that once worshipped Cole Harrington now watched him unravel. By Monday morning, his face was plastered across every newsstand in Manhattan, but this time without admiration. Fraud, betrayal, blood and lies, screamed one headline. His company stock had plummeted 40% overnight. The once untouchable tycoon was now the villain of New York. Cole sat alone in his office, blinds closed, the hum of the city muffled beneath him. The leather chair that once symbolized power now felt like a trap. He hadn't slept in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Grace, alive, unyielding, her voice echoing, "You chose." His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He didn't answer. Then it buzzed once more, this time with a video notification. He pressed play. The footage showed him standing on stage at the gala, face pale, mouth open, staring at Grace. The caption read, "The billionaire who buried his wife." He slammed the phone down, rage shaking through him. Outside the glass doors, the board members were packing their things. His name was being erased from the company he built. The irony cut deep. He had erased Grace to protect his legacy, and now his legacy was what erased him. Across the river, Grace met Daniel and Maya at a small law office. The air smelled like burnt coffee and paper ink, but it felt like safety. The DNA results came in, Daniel said, placing a folder on the table. All 3 children, 100% maternal match. There's no disputing it now. Grace stared at the papers, her throat tightening. So it's official? Yes, Maya said softly. They're yours, Grace. All of them. Tears filled her eyes. For months she had lived without a name, without a voice, without a heartbeat that wasn't filled with pain. Now the truth had given her back everything. Almost everything. What happens to Cole? She asked quietly. Daniel exchanged a glance with Maya. He'll face charges. Fraud, obstruction, falsifying legal documents. Sloane's trial will expose everything. You'll be called to testify, but you'll walk out free. Grace looked out the window toward the skyline. Free, she whispered. I don't even know what that feels like anymore. Maya smiled. Then let's find out. That evening, Grace stood outside the courthouse steps as reporters swarmed around her. Microphones reached out like claws, voices shouting questions. Mrs. Whitmore, do you forgive him? Will you take back custody immediately? Do you plan to rebuild your marriage? Grace paused, steady under the flashing lights. Forgiveness, she said softly, isn't a gift you give to the guilty. It's something you give yourself so you can breathe again. I don't need to rebuild what he broke. I'm building something new. The cameras fell silent for a moment. Then a reporter asked, "And what happens to Mr. Harrington now?" Grace's gaze didn't waver. "He'll finally live in the truth. And sometimes," she said, "that's the harshest sentence of all." Meanwhile, Cole walked through the empty halls of his penthouse. The silence was unbearable. The children had been taken into temporary custody pending transfer to Grace. The nursery was quiet, 3 empty cribs, 3 lives that no longer belonged to him. He picked up one of Grace's old paintings from the floor, faded watercolors of Manhattan at sunset. He traced the brushstrokes with trembling fingers, remembering the woman who once painted it. A tear slipped down his cheek. For the first time, he whispered the truth to the empty room. "You deserved better than me." Down below, the city kept moving, uncaring, alive. In her hotel room across town, Grace sat by the window holding the DNA report in her lap. The proof of her life, her children, her truth. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Tomorrow I'll see them." And for the first time since that stormy night, Grace Whitmore finally believed the sun might rise for her again. The morning of the custody hearing arrived cold and bright. Manhattan glimmered under a thin layer of snow, the city's pulse slower than usual, as if it too was holding its breath. Grace stood in front of the courthouse mirror, buttoning the cuffs of her navy dress. Maya adjusted the collar gently. "You don't need to be perfect," she said. "You just need to be present." Grace smiled faintly. "For the first time in a long time, I am." In the courtroom, the air felt heavy, every whisper carrying like thunder. Cole sat at the defendant's table, eyes hollow, hands clasped tightly. Across from him, Grace held herself upright, dignity wrapped around her like armor. Daniel sat beside her, papers neatly stacked, confidence steady. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge began, "the DNA evidence has confirmed your biological relationship to all 3 children. Do you seek sole custody?" Grace swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly. "Yes, Your Honor. My children were taken from me by deceit. I only want what was mine from the beginning." Cole's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Harrington, has provided constant care and financial stability. He regrets his actions deeply and requests shared custody for the sake of the children's welfare." Grace turned toward him. "You regret the fallout, not the act." Her words hit the room like glass breaking. Even the stenographer paused. Cole's voice cracked. "Grace, I made a mistake. I thought you were gone. I let Sloan." She cut him off. "You didn't just let her. You helped her." The judge raised a hand. "That's enough." She looked between them. "The evidence shows severe misconduct, Mr. Harrington. You not only falsified legal documents, but also participated in concealing the identity of a living person. Custody of the children is hereby awarded solely to Mrs. Whitmore." Cole's shoulders sagged as the gavel struck. The sound echoed like the final nail sealing his downfall. Grace exhaled, trembling, tears threatening to fall. Daniel squeezed her hand. "You did it," he whispered, but she shook her head. "Not yet. I haven't seen them." That afternoon, Grace arrived at the Child Services Center, her heart racing so violently she could barely breathe. The social worker led her down a hallway painted in pastel colors. "They've been waiting," the woman said softly. Through the glass window, Grace saw them, 3 tiny figures playing with blocks on the floor. Eli, Noah, and Ava. Her knees almost gave out. When the door opened, the smallest one, Ava, turned first. The little girl's eyes, her eyes, widened. She toddled forward on unsteady legs. "Mama?" The word shattered Grace's restraint. She fell to her knees as tears streamed down her face. "Yes, baby," she sobbed. "Mama's here." The boys ran to her, their laughter high and bright, little hands clutching her dress. Grace gathered them into her arms, inhaling the scent of baby lotion and warmth and everything she thought she'd lost. For the first time since that night, she felt whole. Behind the glass, Maya wiped her eyes. Daniel turned away, pretending not to. Grace kissed each child's forehead. "I missed you so much," she whispered, "but we're together now. No one will ever take you from me again." As the sun dipped behind the skyline, she looked out the window at the city that had buried her once. Its lights blinked like distant promises. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we start over." The children giggled, tangled in her arms, unaware of the storm their mother had survived. And in that quiet room filled with laughter, Grace Whitmore didn't just win custody. She reclaimed her life. The city moved on quickly. New York always did. But for Cole Harrington, time had stopped. He sat in his penthouse, stripped of power, stripped of family. The once bustling home was silent now. The walls that had echoed with lies now felt like a mausoleum. The press had renamed him the billionaire who killed his own story. His company board had voted him out, his fortune tied up in lawsuits, his reputation beyond repair. Everywhere he went, people turned away. The doorman no longer greeted him by name. Old friends ignored his calls. His mother's charity foundation removed his photo from their annual report. But none of it hurt as much as the emptiness in the nursery. 3 cribs, perfectly lined, still waited, untouched, since the day the children were taken to Grace. He hadn't had the courage to walk inside until now. He stood in the doorway, eyes tracing the small mobile hanging above Ava's crib, the painted clouds that Grace had once designed herself. He touched the wall gently. The paint was fading. So was he. Cole poured himself another glass of scotch and stared out at the Manhattan skyline. He'd built his kingdom out of glass and pride, and now both were cracking. The doorbell rang. He ignored it. It rang again, louder this time. Finally, he opened the door. Daniel Cho stood there holding a thin envelope. Cole frowned. "Here to gloat?" Daniel's expression was tired, not cruel. "No, I'm here because Grace asked me to deliver this." He handed over the envelope and turned to leave, but Cole stopped him. Is she happy?" Daniel hesitated. "She's healing. That's not the same thing." When Cole was alone again, he sat on the couch and opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. Grace and the 3 children sitting in a park, sunlight catching her hair. There was no note, just the image, a picture of what he'd destroyed. His hands shook. For the first time in months, he cried. Not out of guilt, not even out of loss, but out of realization. He had been given everything and valued nothing. That night, he walked through his empty home, turning off every light except one, the lamp beside Grace's old painting of the Brooklyn Bridge. He poured the last of his scotch down the sink. The next morning, he visited his lawyers. "I'm transferring all remaining assets in the trust to Grace and the children," he said. "Every cent." His attorney stared at him. "That will leave you with nothing." Cole nodded. "Then maybe for once I'll know what she felt." He signed the papers without hesitation. Meanwhile, Grace sat at a small cafe near Central Park, sipping coffee while the children played with Maya beside the window. She was tired but peaceful. Daniel arrived, sliding into the seat across from her. "He gave up everything," he said quietly. "The penthouse, the accounts, the company shares, all of it's yours now." Grace looked out the window, watching the snow fall. "I don't want his empire. I just want peace for my kids." Daniel smiled. "You already have it." Grace nodded slowly, her voice almost a whisper. "Then let him keep his ghosts." That night, as Manhattan glittered in silence, Cole packed a single bag. He took one last look at the skyline, then at the empty nursery. He turned off the lights and walked out, closing the door behind him for good. Some empires die with scandal, others die in silence. But Cole Harrington's died the moment he realized what love had cost him, and who had paid the price. Spring came early that year. The snow melted from Central Park's paths, and the air carried the first scent of blooming magnolias. For the first time in a long time, Grace Whitmore woke to sunlight instead of nightmares. She lived now in a modest brownstone near the Upper West Side, nothing like the penthouse she once shared with Cole, but it was hers. The walls were covered in soft pastels and watercolor paintings she'd started again after years of silence. Each brushstroke felt like breathing. Every morning she made pancakes for her children. Ava would giggle as syrup dripped down her fingers. Eli would fight over who got the bigger slice, and Noah would sit quietly sketching by the window, just like Grace used to. The chaos of motherhood was noisy, messy, and gloriously real. Maya often visited, bringing Starbucks coffee and stories from the hospital. "They're still talking about you, you know," she said one morning, handing Grace a caramel latte. "They call you the miracle mother." Grace smiled. "I don't feel like a miracle, just alive." "That's enough," Maya replied. But Grace knew healing wasn't instant. Some nights, she still woke up sweating, hearing Sloane's voice whispering, "It's better if she doesn't wake up." Other times she'd catch herself checking the locks twice, afraid of ghosts that no longer had power. Still, every fear was softer when she looked at her children. They were her proof that love survived even the cruelest betrayal. Across town, Cole Harrington was nowhere to be seen. Rumors said he'd sold everything and left New York. A reporter claimed to have spotted him volunteering at a shelter in upstate New York. Hair unkempt, no security, no entourage. Another article said he'd written a letter to Grace, but she never received it. Or maybe she just never opened it. The world had moved on. But Grace didn't waste her energy on revenge. She had new battles, learning how to forgive herself for trusting the wrong person, and learning how to live without anger eating her alive. Daniel continued to handle her legal affairs, turning down dozens of media deals. "They all want your story," he said. "TV interviews, book contracts, streaming rights." Grace shook her head. "This story doesn't belong to Hollywood. It belongs to my children. When they're older, they'll know it, not the world." He nodded. "You're stronger than you think, Grace." She smiled softly. "No. I just learned that strength isn't about fighting back. It's about walking away when the world expects you to burn it down." That weekend, she took the kids to the park. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom. Families picnicked, children ran, and music floated from street performers near the fountain. Grace sat on a blanket, sketching the skyline. Ava crawled into her lap, asking, "Mommy, why do you paint the city so much?" Grace kissed her forehead. "Because even broken things can still be beautiful." Ava nodded like she understood. "Like us?" Grace smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "Exactly like us." She looked up at the horizon, where the sunlight touched the tops of the buildings, the same city that had once buried her, now reflecting her light back. For a long time, she'd believed her story ended the night Cole betrayed her. But now she understood. That night wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of her second life, the one she built for herself, not for anyone else. And as the wind carried laughter through the park, Grace Whitmore finally realized that survival wasn't the opposite of love. It was proof of it. Upstate New York was quiet in spring. The mountains were still touched with snow, and the Hudson River moved slow and steady, reflecting clouds that looked too calm for the chaos of the city below. In a small wooden cabin near the river, Cole Harrington sat at a desk covered with handwritten pages. The man once known for billion-dollar contracts now struggled to write a single honest sentence. He'd been there for months. No phone, no press, no servants. He worked at a community kitchen during the day and read philosophy books at night. The locals knew him only as Mr. Cole, a quiet man who never talked about his past. But every night, he wrote letters to one person, Grace. He never mailed them. He didn't even date them. He just wrote, "Dear Grace, I used to think power could erase guilt. I was wrong. It only magnified it. You were the light, and I traded you for applause. I thought I could build an empire strong enough to bury the truth. But it turns out truth has roots, and it grows through concrete." He stopped, rubbed his temples, then poured black coffee into a chipped mug. On the desk beside him sat the photograph Daniel had once delivered. Grace in the park, holding the children. Every time he looked at it, something inside him cracked a little more. The guilt had become a kind of companion. It followed him to the kitchen where he chopped vegetables for strangers. It whispered when he lay awake at night. He didn't miss the wealth. He missed forgiveness. But he knew better than to expect it. Meanwhile, in the city, Grace's life had settled into rhythm. Days at the art center, afternoons at the park, quiet evenings reading bedtime stories to her children. One night, after the kids were asleep, Maya visited with a box. "A courier dropped this off," she said, puzzled. No sender listed. Grace hesitated, but opened it carefully. Inside was a small sketchbook, leather-bound, weathered, familiar. She flipped it open and gasped. It was hers. The one she thought she'd lost the night of the storm. Between the pages were her unfinished drawings, half-painted skylines, pencil sketches of her babies before they were born. But near the back, she found something new. A folded note written in a hand she hadn't seen in a long time. "Grace, I found this while packing what's left of my life. You once told me that love is art, something fragile but worth creating anyway. I didn't understand then. I do now. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that the man who destroyed you no longer exists. Whatever good is left of me belongs to you and the children. I'm sorry I learned too late what real love means." Cole Grace read the note twice, tears blurring the ink. Her hands shook, not with anger this time, but with something quieter. "Closure." Maya asked, "Do you want me to find him?" Grace shook her head. "No. Let him stay wherever he is. He's finally facing himself. That's enough." She placed the sketchbook on the shelf, between a framed photo of her children and a candle flickering softly. Then she whispered, "Goodbye, Cole." Up north, that same night, Cole folded another letter and tucked it into a drawer he'd never open again. He looked out the window at the quiet stars and said her name once, barely a breath. And though she would never hear it, it was the first time he spoke it with love instead of ownership. 2 years later, the city had forgiven and forgotten, at least on the surface. Manhattan was always hungry for the next scandal, the next tragedy. But for Grace Whitmore, peace had finally become something real. Her art studio on the Upper West Side was small, filled with sunlight and the smell of acrylic paint. The walls were lined with her new collection, Resurrection, a series of paintings capturing grief, hope, and rebirth. Critics called it hauntingly human. Collectors wanted to buy everything she touched. But Grace refused to sell the centerpiece, a painting of a storm breaking over the Brooklyn Bridge. "That's where it all began," she told Maya one afternoon. "And that's where I'll end it." Maya smiled. "You're thinking of going back there, aren't you?" Grace hesitated. "The River Cafe, our wedding place. I think I need to see it again, to close the circle." That weekend she did. The restaurant was still there, elegant and timeless, overlooking the East River. The same view, the same soft piano music, the same skyline twinkling beyond the glass. She sat at a corner table with her sketchbook, alone but not lonely. A waiter approached. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said kindly, "your reservation's been taken care of." Someone called ahead. Grace frowned. "Who?" Before the waiter could answer, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "I did." She turned. Cole stood there, older, thinner, wearing a simple coat instead of a tailored suit. His hair was flecked with gray, his eyes weary but clear. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the river against the dock below. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," Grace said softly. "I wasn't sure I had the right to," Cole replied, "but I needed to thank you." "For what?" "For surviving me." Grace's throat tightened. "You don't owe me words, Cole. I owe you everything," he said. "You gave me a life I threw away. The least I can do is live the rest of mine without hiding from it." He placed an envelope on the table. "This is for the children, a scholarship fund. I know money can't fix what I broke, but maybe it can build something better for them." Grace didn't touch the envelope. "You don't need to buy redemption," he shook his head. "It's not redemption, it's responsibility." She studied him quietly. There was no arrogance left, no charm, just a man stripped down to truth. For the first time, she saw sincerity where there used to be power. "I forgive you," she said finally, the words surprising even herself. "Not for you, for me. I don't want to carry hate anymore." Cole's eyes filled with tears. "You always were stronger than me." Grace smiled faintly. "No. I just learned how to live after dying." They sat for a few minutes in silence, two people who had shared both love and ruin, now linked only by memory, and three small lives growing somewhere far from the darkness they once created. When Cole stood to leave, he hesitated. "Grace?" "Yes?" Tell them their father finally did one good thing." She nodded. "They'll know." He walked away without looking back, disappearing into the city lights. Grace opened her sketchbook and began to draw the river, calm, endless, forgiving. And for the first time since that stormy night, the bridge no longer looked like a reminder of death, but a promise of peace. The years rolled forward like calm waves after a storm. What was once chaos had settled into rhythm, a new life that didn't erase the past but grew around it. Grace Whitmore had become more than an artist. She was a symbol. The world that once pitied her now respected her. Her name appeared in art journals, women's magazines, and empowerment conferences. She never sought the spotlight, but it found her anyway. Still, fame had lost its shine for her. What mattered now were her children. Eli, Noah, and Ava had grown into vibrant little souls, each one carrying a piece of her heart, and despite everything, a flicker of their father's eyes. Grace never hid the truth from them. When they asked why she and Daddy didn't live together, she didn't say he was bad or he left. She said, "He made a mistake that hurt us all, but he's learning how to be better." It wasn't forgiveness for him, it was protection for them. One afternoon, the school hosted a family heritage day. The children were asked to bring something that told their family's story. Grace helped them paint a mural of a city under a thunderstorm, with sunlight breaking through in the center. When Ava presented it, she said proudly, "This is about my mom. She died once, but then she came back." The room went silent. Grace's eyes stung, but she smiled. Afterward, one of the teachers approached her. "Your daughter's story, it's powerful. Have you ever thought of turning it into a book?" Grace shook her head. "I've already lived it. I don't need to sell it." But that night, as she tucked the children into bed, she thought about legacy, not wealth or fame, but the lessons that lived on. Maybe one day, when they were old enough, they would understand how truth had saved them all. Far from Manhattan, in a small town by the Hudson, Cole Harrington lived quietly. He worked as a carpenter, fixing old furniture for local families. He never spoke about who he was, and no one asked. Every month, he received updates from the trust foundation he had set up in his children's names. He never contacted them directly. He didn't want to disturb their peace. But knowing they were thriving was enough. Sometimes he'd drive to the edge of the city, park across from Central Park, and watch from a distance as Grace walked the kids home from school. He never approached, just stood in the shadow of the life he once ruined, grateful it existed at all. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, he took out a small wooden box from his coat pocket. Inside were 3 handmade toys, a carved bird, a wooden car, and a little ballerina. He left them on the park bench where Grace and the kids often stopped for ice cream. No note, no name, just a quiet offering. The next morning when Grace found them, she knew instantly who had left them. She looked around, but he was already gone. She picked up the toys and smiled faintly. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind. That night, after the kids fell asleep, she placed the toys on their dresser and sat by the window, looking out at the skyline she once feared. It didn't hurt anymore. It glowed. Maya's words echoed in her mind. "Truth doesn't just set you free, it keeps you alive." Grace closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer for the man she once loved, the children she now lived for, and the peace she had fought so hard to earn. Because survival had given her life again, but forgiveness made her immortal. 10 years had passed since the night Grace Whitmore walked into that ballroom and shattered the lie that had buried her. Time had not erased her scars, it had carved them into strength. New York had changed. The skyline glowed brighter, sleeker, louder. But Grace's world had slowed down, softened into something beautifully ordinary. Her mornings began with laughter, not fear. Her evenings ended with peace, not pain. She was 42 now, her hair streaked with silver she refused to dye. She called it truth-colored. Her art had grown beyond the city. Galleries in Paris and Tokyo displayed her collection, Rebirth. Critics called it transcendent. She called it therapy. Her children were no longer babies. Ava, now 10, wanted to be a painter. Eli played piano and Noah loved science. They filled the home with light and chaos, a rhythm that never stopped reminding her that she'd survived for them. Maya still visited often, her laughter echoing through the apartment. Daniel had married and moved to Boston but remained a close friend. Life was full, not perfect, but real. One spring afternoon, Grace stood on the balcony overlooking Central Park. The cherry blossoms swayed in the breeze, their petals drifting like confetti from heaven. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The city that once broke her now held her gently. Then, the mail arrived. Among the bills and letters was one envelope, no return address, just her name written in familiar handwriting. Her pulse skipped. She sat at the table and opened it carefully. Inside was a simple note. "Grace, if this letter ever reaches you, it means I'm gone. I wanted to say thank you for living, for proving that love, even when destroyed, can still create something beautiful. The children you raised, they are my redemption, though I'll never meet them as their father. Please tell them I loved them, even from afar. Tell them I was sorry, and that I learned what love really means by losing it." A small photograph slipped out of the envelope, him standing by a lake, older, smiling faintly. peace in his eyes. Grace sat in silence, tears running freely down her face. Not of grief, but of release. Maya arrived minutes later and found her holding the letter. "What is it?" Grace handed it to her. Maya read it quietly, then placed a hand over her friend's. "You okay?" Grace nodded. "Yes. For the first time, I think I truly am." She folded the letter, tucked it into her sketchbook, and looked out the window again. That weekend, she took her children to the River Cafe, the same place where her story had begun and where it had nearly ended. They laughed over pancakes and cocoa, unaware of how much life had been rebuilt to give them this moment. Ava pointed to the water. "Mommy, what are you thinking about?" Grace smiled softly. "About bridges, sweetheart." "Why bridges?" "Because they don't erase the distance," she said. "They connect it." Ava thought about that, then nodded seriously. "That's what you did, Mommy. You built the bridge." Grace's eyes shimmered. She reached across the table and took her children's hands. "Maybe I did." Outside, the sun began to set over the East River, painting the sky gold. Grace stood and watched it in silence, the wind lifting her hair, the world humming softly around her. For the first time, there was no past haunting her, only the present, full and alive. And as the last light touched the water, Grace Whitmore finally understood. She hadn't come back from the dead. She had simply learned how to live. Trelivit content vu canal denoi. So, that's how the story ends. Grace's journey wasn't really about betrayal or revenge. It was about rebirth. About losing everything she thought defined her, and then realizing that peace isn't something you find. It's something you build, piece by piece. If you're still here, listening until the very end, maybe something in her story touched you too. Maybe you've been through your own kind of storm, where love hurt, where trust broke, where you had to crawl back into the light. And that's okay, because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning how to live again. There's a quote from Marcus Aurelius that says, "The obstacle is the way." Every pain, every betrayal, every ending, it isn't meant to destroy you. It's meant to shape you. Like Grace, you can rise again, stronger, quieter, and freer than before. So if this story spoke to you, don't let it end here. Share it. Leave a like. Subscribe to the channel, because somewhere out there another heart needs this reminder. You can survive what tried to bury you and grow from it. And remember, my friend, sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do after being broken is to keep living anyway.